My name is Mariah DeGrino. I'm a land use partner in our Chicago office, and I'm so pleased to introduce this morning's concurrent session, Innovating, Disrupting, and Commingling Space Environments. If you were hoping to hear the other topic, that's across the hall. Our panel chair is Mitchell Shear. He is executive partner at Camber Creek, the longest-standing real estate technology, PropTech, focused venture capital firm. Together with his partners, he works to identify early-stage, industry-leading portfolio companies to cultivate, invest in, and grow to deliver outsized returns to Camber Creek's investors. With over 35 years of leadership technology, innovation, placemaking, and development experience, Mitchell has led both private and public real estate companies where he developed and enhanced buildings and environments, envisioning and delivering the vibrant neighborhoods we celebrate today across the Washington, D.C. region. From 2003 until 2017, Mitchell was president of Vornado, Charles E. Smith, where he directed the strategy, performance, and growth of Vornado's extensive 20+ million square foot Washington, D.C. portfolio. In Arlington, Virginia, his forward-thinking, placemaking vision transformed Crystal City, now National Landing, into a vibrant, creative community that became home to a growing innovation hub and great restaurants, retail concepts. Please help me welcome Mitchell Shear, who will introduce our panelists and kick off this exciting discussion.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. So now we're going to talk about innovating, disrupting, and commingling space environments. As Steve earlier said this morning, he used the term co-convergence. I thought that was great. And we've heard others say co-mingled, and we even hear some people say co-everything. So we got sort of a very fast, at 10,000 square feet level of his perspective. So now we're going to talk to the practitioners. We're going to talk about how space uses are changing and how consumption of space is changing as well. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for the day. We have first, sitting right next to me, Peter Barnett, the real estate strategy leader for PwC. Peter leads PwC's U.S. internal real estate strategy for a portfolio of more than 6 million square feet in 6 countries, providing an important bridge between business strategy and workplace strategy. Peter has more than 20 years of experience in the global commercial and corporate real estate industry, having served in a variety of roles ranging from broker consultant to landlord and corporate end user. And just a fun fact, he has taught real estate classes in multiple countries across North America, Europe, and Asia. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Next, we have Laura Hinds Pierce, Managing Director at Hinds. Laura is Transformation Officer for Hinds, supporting the firm's strategic and transformation efforts across the business. She supports strategic, leading-edge initiatives to position Hinds as the best real estate investor, partner, and manager in the world. Lofty goal, huh?
No big deal.
In addition, Laura is a lead advisor for One Hinds Women Network, which seeks to create new networking and mentorship opportunities for women and to increase the percentage of female leadership in the firm. Next, we have Jody McLean, the Chief Executive Officer at Edens. Jody heads up Edens, one of the nation's leading private owners, operators, and developers of real estate. With a 25-year-plus track record at Edens, Jody has been a key player in the growth and expansion of the company, which now has assets valued at more than $6.5 billion. It was Jody's strategic thinking that moved the portfolio to major urban areas at the center of community life. Edens developments are highly focused on authentic engagement and connectivity. And finally, our last panelist is Ryan Simonetti, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Convene. Ryan can best be described as a transformational entrepreneur, having created and grown Convene out of whole cloth. Convene designs and services a network of premium places to work, meet, and host inspiring events. They have raised more than $260 million in equity to date, and Convene has been named one of America's 100 most promising companies by Forbes. And Ryan himself has been recognized as top entrepreneur by Crain's, New York, among several others. So with that said, I would love it if each of you could give a quick overview of your company, and let's try and do it in 2 minutes or less, starting with Peter.
2 minutes on PwC. Well, we do many things. Professional services is, of course, is the broad scope, but really our, if you want to call it our special sauce, is our people. And the way that we've decided to not only embrace technology as a firm to serve our clients, but also to invest in upskilling all of our 55,000 employees to make sure that as markets change and businesses change, that they have the tools they need to be relevant for years to come. So that's something that excites me personally as an employee of PwC, but just a fantastic investment. And so that's us, it's our people and the technology we use.
Hinds is a firm that was founded in 1957 by my grandfather, and since then we've really grown to operate in 23 countries, and really I think what's unique is we operate really across all 4 asset classes, across the risk spectrum, and are vertically integrated across all of that. And so I do think it gives us a bit of a unique value proposition to our investors, but I think our secret sauce is our people as well. And I think that organic growth over 60 years has really taken the culture that came at the founding and really fostered it and continued to grow. And I think it's exciting for me. You can walk into an office in Gurgaon, India, or Warsaw, or Chicago, and it feels like Hinds people, and it feels like a Hinds office. And so I think that's also our secret sauce.
Eden's, as Mitchell said, we're a privately held company. We have about $6.5 billion that we own and operate in 125 what we call community-centric places in 9 major markets across the country. I would say our secret sauce is the passion that our people have for our singular purpose, which is to enrich community. And we think about that in all ways, and we lead with that, is really how people want to spend their time. So versus what people want to buy or shop, we can't control those things anymore. The consumer is completely in control of what they want and where they want it. What we think about is how they would want to spend their time and how we can inspire them to spend 3.5 trips per week, 5 hours of dwell time with us, which are huge numbers. But the problem we're trying to solve is a rising epidemic of isolation, loneliness, and depression in this country that is tracking right with the rise of technology and social media. And as that becomes more and more important parts of all of our lives, this desire to build community is stronger than we've ever seen it before. And so when people show up, they want to spend their time, and when they engage, the most fascinating thing is that their pocketbooks and their wallets follow them. And so when we start and lead with people, so we really have tried to say, we're going to lead with humanity. We're in the business of humanity versus real estate. It's amazing how the business model comes right in behind it.
Good morning. As Mitchell said, Ryan Simonetti, co-founder and CEO of Convene. Convene partners with Class A building owners really to bring a sense of place and maximize human experience in an office building. And we do that by designing premium places to meet, to work, to host inspiring events. Today, across our 30 locations around the country, we're hosting things like this today in our locations. We believe, and have for a long time, we've been doing this for almost 10 years, that companies are going to outsource more and insource less. And the reason is that I think the way that we as individuals work has fundamentally changed. And that's causing folks like Peter to rethink how do they actually create a real estate strategy and create a workplace experience that speaks to them. And what we're seeing is as this shift towards outsourcing happens, it's putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the building owner to respond and to offer different types of experiences and amenities. So before I started Convene, I ran an investments team, and I primarily invest in two asset classes, office buildings and hotels. And the thesis was, well, what if you ran an office building like a lifestyle hotel? And as we think about the future, we think about this convergence of outsourcing meets experience. And while I think a lot of our landlord partners are great at finding locations and developing buildings, they're not hospitality companies at their core. And I think that's what Convene is. We're not a co-working company. We're not WeWork. We're a hospitality company that understands the power of design and food and technology and a human touch, and how that can actually bring the places that we occupy to life. And really create a sense of community within a vertical building. And we operate now across 7 cities globally, including London. We have 30 locations, and we've designed and built and operate about 1.5 million square feet of space. And that's powering the human experience in over 30 million square feet of Class A office buildings around the country.
Great, thank you. So let's dig right in with sort of the backdrop of these real estate practitioners are building physical assets, and it takes some time to plan and execute and open and operate these kinds of facilities. So we talk about how the ball is moving, where it may be moving to, yet we are physical providers of space. So if we start with PwC and we just ask you, how's your thinking changed, or might it be changing in terms of space consumption and usage?
So I think part of the answer to that is in the question that 10 years ago we were very, very focused on things like usage. And while I'm not saying we're not focused on making sure we're using our assets as well as we can, we're now focused so much more heavily on what's the experience within that space. And what we've seen as we've become better and better at, on any given day, I think our offices are average 75% utilized, 75 to 80%, which is great in the industry. But as you start to push things like usage and consumption up and up and up, then while you might be really efficient, the experience starts to suffer. And we can make leaps and bounds with technology, and we invest a lot in technology to make the management of the space and people's ability to use the space much easier. But actually, if anything, I personally think of a trend more towards not using utilization as much of a benchmark of success for my group, who has to go out and make sure that 55,000 people have the best possible experience in the environment to do that. So it's really trending back a little bit from, well, let me cram as many people as I can, because it's obviously we want to use our capital wisely, but a bigger return on that capital invested is if people stay longer, they're happier, and they do better work that way. So that's how we're thinking about it.
Great. Jody, would you give us an example of some spaces that you think are highly effective today, whether it's in your portfolio or otherwise?
Sure. So we're learning how to use space just radically different. When you asked Mitchell the things that keep me up at night, I think a lot about internal versus external forces. Mm-hmm. And in the world in which we're in retail, and you're just in constant disruption, which is come around full circle to being cool. It's the nimbleness of our people that I think about, because we're changing so quickly, and we have to look, so first and foremost with our people, and then with our space. Our space has to be so flexible, because ultimately the ultimate consumer wants something different. So we're thinking about things much like what Ryan was talking to. about how we have space that we can offer as event space for our retailers. They don't want it permanently, but they need use to constantly have events. That can also double as boardroom space for our office buildings above. We're having to rethink a lot of our average leases are still longer towards, throughout our whole portfolio on 15 million square feet is about 8.8 years. But as we're thinking about a lot of our space having shorter term leases on it, and those leases could be as short as hours, and it could be as short as days. And then we're thinking about our public space totally different. We're doing most everything we're doing has a densification component to it. So our common areas no longer are spaces that look for people to use as they're passing through. They're looking for places where people can convene. And as people are working so much differently, they want to be vibrant, authentic places that have great ground level. And so our public spaces have to be flexible for that. So somebody might want to use it during the day as their temporary office, as their meeting space, and at night it can convert to yoga in the park after work. People want to come and be a part of the community then, and then in the evenings it can be family space. So we're looking at all of our space completely different in this nimble world in which we're operating.
Thank you. So for Laura and for Ryan, how do you think about creating, or if it's a reuse, how do you think about adapting spaces to the customers for today and going forward?
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's really interesting. I think part of the way Hinds made its name really was in the 70s and 80s, really catching an office wave and doing it in a design-forward way. Really prioritizing high-quality design for the benefit of the tenant as well as for the broader community. I think what's changing now is that was a very outside-in perspective of the way that we approached buildings. And I think, it's being flipped on its head a little bit where, and you heard a little bit about it this morning, we are having to think first about what the tenant experience is, what's driving their needs, what their problems are that they're trying to solve. So, Peter's talking about, it would be great to get high utilization out of your space, but that diminishes the tenant experience, your employee's experience within your space. And so for the landlord, we're starting to think about, well, if that's PwC's problem, then how do we help them get higher utilization out of their rented space while using the rest of the building to give them that high quality employee experience and that, keeps their employees happy. And so it's a challenge. It's not exactly in the landlord's interest to do that. But, I think the industry has shifted and it's not really a choice anymore. And so it's really then about how do we put the tenants' needs first and help to solve their problems holistically.
And just to follow on, do you have any specific building or project that you might reference in terms of any of the new thinking that's going in that's either recently completed or under development?
Sure. I think one that I'm very excited about because Hinds is actually moving our headquarters to it is Texas Tower in downtown Houston. It's out of the ground now, so still another 18 months away, but it's really one of the first buildings that we brought on an interior architect at the same time we brought on sort of the design architect for the building. And helping us to think about what the tenants' needs are, working with partners like Convene to think about what they're seeing on the ground, what people are asking for. We're putting our money where our mouth is a little bit because we're trying to solve our own needs with our own employees in that building.
Great, Ryan?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, our entire business model is solving that problem, which is how do I, as a building owner, commit the square footage and the capital to build the right experiences and flexibility for a longer-term tenant? Because that's an economic challenge as much as it is a product and an experience challenge. And what we've been able to do as a business is to solve that problem and at the same time make a lot of money doing it for us and our landlord partners. And that's the value of brand and product expertise. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. It's kind of, if you think about a hotelier, why do you align with a flag or a brand? Well, it's not just about the experience, it's that economically you're going to generate a higher return by working with that brand potentially over another. And I think that's one of the things that's really fundamentally unique about the business that we've created. From a design perspective, we practice something called human-centered design or design thinking. It was pioneered really by IDEO and has been, I think, adopted across a lot of different, especially product-driven industries. And where we start our design isn't with a company or a building owner, we start with an individual user. And we design our product, our experiences, our services, and our technology back from that. And what we know today is that the speed at which that user's needs are changing is faster than ever before in our business. And we as a company have product standards, right? We call them typologies, which are constantly being updated. That's based on financial performance at location, data that we're collecting both from users, companies, individuals. We are releasing a new product standard typology across our company every 30 days.
Wow.
Every 30 days, the next wave of Convene projects that happen are different than the ones that happened 30 days prior. And even with that, if I think out 3 years, 4 years, 5 years as work-life integration continues to blend and technology starts to impact that, where we start to move into personalization at the individual level. Forget about PwC, the company. It's actually about delivering to an individual in a building. It keeps us up at night thinking about how do we design enough flexibility into the space and into our infrastructure. Now, what's interesting is the way that we think about it is kind of the way that Apple thinks about their phone. To me, hardware is a commodity, space, relatively speaking. But it's the software and the services that you can update every single day. Right? We could argue that this Four Seasons here probably at some point will be in need of a renovation. They've probably been working with the same plant for a long time, but what is Four Seasons doing? Every quarter, every year, they're updating their menus, they're updating their service standards, that delivery model, they're bringing in new curated partners. And that's a lot the way that we think about building Convene, is that no matter, even if a space is 3 years old, the experience is still relevant because we're updating all of these other things along the way.
So to that point, I was just going to ask you that. So if you, let's say you have a series of Convene 1.0s and now you have a series of Convene 2.0s, maybe it's actually 6.0 at this point, but how are the earlier Convenes working and performing and adapting compared to the ones that you're building or in the pipeline right now?
From a financial performance standpoint, I mean, our legacy locations continue to perform extremely well. We've seen same-store growth, 12% compound a year over the last 3 years within even our legacy portfolio, which to me speaks not just to Convene and the quality of the service and hospitality delivery, but is also substantiating this macro shift towards outsourcing, which I think is the trend line that we're technically all playing off of. The way that we think about investing our capital, we're on right now about a 3 to 5 year refresh cycle where we go back and renovate or upgrade existing facilities. All of our technology infrastructure, which I could argue is obsolete in 24 to 36 months, most of that stuff is off balance sheet financed as operating leases. So every 3 years, new technology and infrastructure is immediately making its way into a Convene location. And then from a physical design and plant perspective, we're on a 5-year refurbishment cycle. And what we've seen is if you don't cheap out on the upfront infrastructure, doing carpet and wall coverings and artwork and new light fixtures on a cost basis is way cheaper than having to touch MEP infrastructure. And so I think we are over-investing or over-committing capital early so that as we think about a 10-year, 15, 20-year window, that the ongoing CapEx investment over time doesn't diminish our partners, landlord partners, or us return on invested capital over duration.
Okay, so let's shift the conversation a little bit. If we look at the lines blurring between the different product types, and each of you put your crystal balls on, and we start looking even 12 and 24 months in terms of what may be developed at that point in time, how do we see things commingling? How do you all see your role? By way of example, there's a pop-up hotel company called Y Hotel. And they've been operating quote-unquote hotels in new apartment buildings and during the lease-up period. But in addition to that, sort of their 2.0 is something they're calling hospitality living. And they're suggesting that what they will build is retail and office, flexing at the base. As you go up through the building, you might be able to rent an apartment for a night that's furnished. You may be able to rent for a year that's furnished or unfurnished, and they would do it under the zoning that would be hotel use, which is the most restrictive. So I'd love to just throw it open to all you guys about what you're thinking about. Laura, you want to start?
Sure. I think as far as a crystal ball, I think there are opportunities to, be commingling uses really across all asset classes. And, most recently, we're experiencing in the UK and Asia, our industrial tenants looking for some of the same type of amenities that we saw 10 years ago in office, because they have employees, that they have human capital that they're also trying to retain and keep happy and engaged. And so, that's one small example, but in my mind, it's really, you've heard, I think, this term from all of us, this idea of flexibility in your assets is, in my mind, going to become so much more critical, because it's almost impossible to pull out a crystal ball and say for sure this trend is going to take hold and lead the industry. I think it's going to be a little bit fragmented in how we find value in our assets by commingling these uses. And so I think the key that we're starting to really think about and try and build in is, how do we create flexibility? How do we spend more money up front on the infrastructure, on the physical space to make it adaptable, so that you can either have multiple uses within a day, or you can have multiple uses across a 5-year period, because things are changing so fast. And when you think about it from a real estate owner's perspective or a real estate developer's perspective, real estate doesn't happen overnight. It's, it takes time to actually build a building or refresh a space. And, as you're hearing from Ryan, in 30 days, that could be obsolete. And so how do you continue to build in that flexibility in the infrastructure to be able to adapt to what's coming?
I think too, some of what's going to continue to blur as much as the classification or property type is the expectations are so blurred and are changing with what people expect out of a physical asset or they expect in our spaces. So I'll give you an example. We're in some of our newest offices, and one in particular out on the West Coast. I mean, within my walls, I have a mother's suite, a yoga studio, a wellness center, showers, communal meeting space, outdoor patios, indoor libraries, parks. I have all of these things that we decided to invest, because that's the expectation from people coming from either other companies within Silicon Valley or coming to other places. So over the next year to 2 years, the expectations of having, I want more of the things that I could get in my suburban neighborhood here within the office and within the building. And so that's why we see the investments that landlords are making, and companies like Ryan's are trying to fill some of the gaps or take some of the pressure off. the expectations are going to continue to be blurred between what you have to operate and what the people are going to demand as they walk in the door.
So Peter, if you just stay with that for a moment, as you're looking for space, whether it's taking new space, renewing an existing location, et cetera, how do you think about that process? Meaning, do you look favorably upon environments that are built and heavily amenitized so that you can then just take your space? Are you happy to take a larger envelope, maybe at a lesser cost, and include those in your envelope? Does it change whether it's a big office or a small office? But maybe you can give us some ideas as to how that affects your decision making.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if we're going to make a location decision, an asset that has many of those amenities already in it, or conferencing centers, or high-end food facilities, and recreational areas, game rooms, things like that are available for building tenants, that definitely is going to make me much more heavily likely to look at that asset and that building. And right now I'm committing to long periods of time, especially in cities like Chicago and New York and Boston. Could be 10, 15-year leases, and it's much easier for me to get comfortable with the envelope of space then that I take, which is the hardest needle to predict, which is 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Is this envelope of space, despite the best options that I can negotiate with the building owner, is this going to work? So the more that I can rely on the amenities that are within the asset itself, absolutely, it makes it 100% easier to make a good decision. I can't change the physical location of this bricks and mortar building. I can go across the street, and we have gone across the street just for better amenities, better infrastructure, more ease of operating. People can get in and out easier, parking's better, things like that. So it's very important.
So one last question. When you just mentioned the notion of expansion space and options that you can negotiate, lots of landlords and property owners are thinking that having flexible space, having co-working space available in a building sort of serves as that accordion so that you can flex in and out of those kind of spaces. If they invest in those kind of spaces, maybe they don't need to provide as much encumbered space to you. Are you finding that flexible space is a solution for future expansion space?
It depends on the use of it. So flexible space for things like meeting and events is much easier for us to use because I don't have, candidly, as many privacy concerns with my people, sitting in a place all day in someone else's space. Co-working as an asset class is difficult for us to use in many ways because of the regulation that we're subject to as an auditing firm, and the fact that I don't necessarily need or want to commingle 50 or 100 or 200 of my people with other people. It's not going to inherently make their lives easier or their lives better. So we're actually, our business intelligence team, we're trying right now to use that AI, machine learning, and all the data that we have to say, okay, if we look at a city and we think we know we're going to need occupancy for the next 20 years, am I better off to make that bet that within that building there's going to be some flexible space that, not that I need to use as a tenant, but that I'm hoping 5 years down the road I can look at that as expansion space and not encumber it myself. So can I go to a 5-year lease rather than a 15-year lease? Is it worth the trade-off in capital that I might get, TI allowance, lower rents, things like that?
Mitchell, I would say, and we really did this in the mid-2000s, shifted where we were willing to take some bets and some risks, and instead of following the office developer, the multifamily developer, and become the retail, we led in creating districts, and we were willing to take this upfront risk to say we will take entitlement risk, we'll take planning risk, we'll take design risk, because we know if we can get the ground plane right and make places really authentic, make them vibrant, where people want to spend their time, then we will have the choice of the right multifamily, the right office partner, and there'll be better locations for them, and their people will want to be here because there'll be a lot to engage. So I think that was for us, a big shift that has played out and has done the things we thought it would do. Now what we're trying to do is figure out how to make these districts really a much broader community and engage the office dwellers, engage the multifamily residents in an ongoing community where they really feel a part of things, more so than just having the local watering hole or their local restaurant to go after work. They're really part of a community where everybody knows their name. And so I think that's a big shift for us. So working directly with the PWCs and understanding what it is that they're, and Ryan said this earlier, it's not understanding what their corporate needs are, it's understanding what the people's needs are who actually work there. And so it's changed. It used to be, right, when I started, we could build, we could lease, and the best relationship we would have with any retail partner is that we collect the checks on time and they never had to call us about a roof leak. And that's just, that is forever gone. This is an ongoing, true relationship of not only understanding our own retail partners, but the community and the people's needs, the individual needs, and now integrating all the other uses that are there. But what we're finding is all of our occupancy are up, all of our rental rates are growing, whether it's just in the retail or in the office or in the multifamily, because people want to be a part of communities, really vibrant communities.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, the future is mixed use or multi-purpose, however you want to define that. And that's both within a space, like you could hear PwC, even when they're thinking about building their own corporate office or an HQ, everything that they're having to integrate into that, from food and beverage to meeting and communal spaces to wellness to mother spaces to healthcare, they're having to solve for all of that in their envelope. And we're seeing that same trend within our spaces. And then we're also starting to see ourselves marry up with different types of asset class uses. So I don't know if anyone's seen, we're in a building at 75 Rock, RXR building in New York. It's called like the Unicorn Building. Well, I mean, we might lose a unicorn soon, but the building is Convene, there's retail at the base. We're running a membership club and an amenity with a restaurant at the top of the building with a super high-end conferencing and event space. WeWork is doing a flexible office program there. And then RXR is partnering with Airbnb to do 150,000 square feet of short-term hospitality rental. That's in one building, which a decade ago would have been a Class A office building and now is a Class A mixed-use asset and environment. And so that's definitely the trend that we're seeing, especially as we call it work-life integration. It used to be I would leave my job and go home and start my life and vice versa, and now that stuff is completely integrated. And so we just opened up a location in New York, a new flagship, version, I don't know what, maybe 5.0 or something, Mitchell. It's 117,000 square feet. It has 30,000 square feet of high-end meeting and conferencing and event space. We've got 20,000 square feet dedicated to amenities, not just for the Convene customers, but for all of the tenants in the office building. That has a food and beverage experience integrated into it. And then we partnered with a company called Hydra to do a 4,000 square foot wellness facility where we have fitness classes and shower and spa facilities, meditation rooms, mother's rooms. And we also did a partnership with a company called Eden Health, where we actually have on-site primary health care. On-site. And you automatically, as a Convene member, and also as a member from the building, from a tenant perspective, you get access to a digital healthcare concierge platform with on-site primary care. And to me, I think the future of our business probably looks a lot more like that than the stuff that we were doing 12 or 18 or 24 months ago.
So if you just go back to the 75 Rock example, it sounds like there's a tremendous number of amenities, but there isn't sort of the block of space that's being leased to traditional users. Is that?
No, there is. They've got, I'd say, a third of the building is under a long-term lease to Bank of America and U.S. Trust, which is the private client business.
Got it. Okay. So if we've been talking about this incredible pace of change. How would you all think about the challenges and the opportunities that come with it?
I think from our perspective, it's a little bit what I mentioned, that real estate doesn't happen overnight, and so we feel a little bit, from our perspective, like we're living in this moment of the already but not yet. So we can start to see where things are going. We're starting to see trends. We think we know what's coming in some ways. In other ways, we don't. We talk a lot about data. I think there are a lot of ways that are very clear in terms of how we'll be able to use that to really further our business. There are a lot of ways we don't yet know. I mean, we have over 100 billion in assets under management. The amount of data that is flowing through those assets is absolutely staggering. Where do we start? And knowing that it's going to be important, knowing that we need to be on the leading edge of it, but also not really, we're sort of living in this moment of how do we start down that path? How do we design for buildings that, somewhere in the future are going to incorporate autonomous cars? What do we do with parking? We need parking today. How do we design that for a future state so that a building isn't completely obsolete in 10 years? I think that living in this moment of, it was mentioned this morning, and I think this is great, we overestimate the change in 2 years and underestimate the change in 10 years. In real estate, you're sort of living somewhere in between in that time spectrum. So what do we do for that? That's our biggest challenge right now.
Maybe I'll start with an opportunity that kind of piggybacks off of what you were just talking about, Ryan, is that, so if anybody's ever visited major campuses like Apple Park and many of Google's places, one of the benefits to having a campus is you have all of those things that Ryan was talking about right there on site. Right? You have health and wellness facilities, you have nurseries, daycares, you have all of these things, which that's great if you're a company of that size, but if you're a smaller company or a mid-sized company, or I have 25,000 feet out of 1 million square feet in that building, how can I get those range of services available to my people that are convenient? If that's a huge opportunity, because if the groups up here can partner together and say, what, this is health and wellness is not a trend, it's not going away. Work-life balance and integration is not a trend, it's not going away. How can we deliver that great campus-like list of amenities and experiences to smaller companies or smaller blocks of space or smaller uses? I just start there and say that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I see huge opportunity as we continue to densify and bring more and more uses together in our districts and in our places. We see people wanting to use our space longer hours, different uses, so they're great opportunities to really continuously rethink. And I think our biggest challenge, and I said this earlier, is that just as you're starting to see trends, or just as you're starting to set new processes in place, everything is changing so fast. So it is how do you keep your own teams completely nimble during a time where, and what Laura said is right, we're looking at planning out projects that were an entitlement now we know won't be built for 5-6 years out. How do we continuously keep ourselves nimble enough that what we wind up building is what the consumer, is what the community wants at that day, not what they wanted 5 or 6 years ago. It's a constant challenge to stay current.
I think the challenge, and it's a really tough time to invest capital because of how fast things are changing. And I agree that we tend to overestimate early and underestimate late. And I would say if you look at kind of the trend, at least what we've seen happen within not just office as an asset class, but across real estate as an industry, I'd say we're probably less close to the beginning and getting closer to the end. And so as we think about investing our capital, and our landlord's capital. I mean, our landlord partners in many of our deals are investing 95+% of the capital, on average 70% of the capital. So we're investing a lot as well as our partners. And in order to be a good fiduciary on that, we need to be making sure that we're investing those dollars in things that we think are going to be relevant for time, and that's not easy. And that gets back to, I think, the way that we're trying to design flexibility and agility into our plan so that we can stay relevant over time as things change. The areas where we are investing a lot of capital is really in technology, because technology can move faster than brick and mortar can move. So as a company right now, I mean, we're spending what a software company would spend on technology. So we're spending 7% of our gross revenue as a company on technology investments so that we can not just create a better experience for our customers, but also so that we can start to better understand their behavior and the data that's coming from all of these different interactions between us and our customers and us and buildings, because that information will start to help drive future decision making, not just for us, but also for our partners as well. And then we're also spending a lot of time on culture, because as human beings, we crave stability. And the last thing that you're going to get today, especially working for a company like Convene as an employee, is the perception of stability, because it is changing. And so we're spending and investing a lot of our time internally on, one, hiring the right people, but two, making sure that we're constantly training them, being transparent with them so that they can continue to push our innovation forward as an organization, and at the same time deliver great hospitality experiences to our clients.
So you've all touched upon use of information and data. So maybe you want to comment on what you're actually collecting and how it's influencing your decision making, and maybe even use some examples.
I'll say, I mean, we have spent a lot of the last couple of years really understanding the data we have been collecting, both in terms of understanding investment priorities and markets and sort of investment opportunities, but also our existing portfolio. I think where we're starting to look is really trying to understand our tenants. And you can imagine a world where, I mean, I think we can all say that Google probably knows us better than we know ourselves in terms of our shopping habits and the ads we're getting on the sidebar.
Scary. It is scary.
But there starts to be a world where how can we help PwC by understanding how they compare to other tenants in terms of solving their problems and understanding what their needs are, and sort of use our ability to operate across geographies and even asset classes to really help understand those problems and solve them. I think we're really, to be honest, very much at the forefront of that, or at the start of that, and understanding how to tackle that, I think, is a challenge.
We're using technology to understand heat maps at our places, where are people really spending their time, how often are they coming, so that when we make a capital investment, is it really driving human behavior, people coming more often, and we overlay that obviously with retailer sales and seeing what the end result is. And we're doing that when we do engagement. If we have live music, does that attract people? Are they spending more time? And then over time, are those same people coming back and spending? And are their pocketbooks following? So we're doing a lot of tracking, not the particular person of who, but how often somebody's coming, how often they're staying, what is our capital investment, what's our curation, what are the events we're doing. We overlaid that with impression. Social media impressions are really important also in our places relevant, and then overlaying all of that was retailer sales to say, wait a second, what are the trends, and are these really making a difference in what we're doing? So we try to, that's the data we're trying to collect and overlay.
For us, from a technology strategy perspective, it's how do we build an operating system, we call it kind of Convene OS, that allows our customers and our hospitality teams to kind of optimize the experience within the Convene envelope, and then in that process, how can we remove friction? So can I go on to convene.com, search a space, book a space online, check out online without having to talk to anyone? Well, there's a lot of value in that depending on what type of customer you are. I think in the future state, we'd love for you to come on to convene.com, go through that process, and then not only do you check out, but we start to recommend you, hey, we think this meeting room is going to be appropriate for you in this setting. You should try this package. Or you're a workplace customer looking for space for 30 people. When we ask you 5 questions, what industry you're in, how would you define your culture, all of a sudden we can recommend you a test fit and an aesthetic for your space. And so for us, it's really about better understanding and anticipating the needs of our customers. At the individual level, you have to be really careful right now. 1, opt-in, and 2, anonymous. And so any data that we're collecting from an actual individual user is all fully anonymized. Because it's not so much about the individual for us, it's about aggregating the individuals and understanding what trends we're seeing, both physically within space, so we heat map our spaces as well, but then also by industry code, right? So depending on what life cycle a company is or what industry, and it informs for us how they may or may not use space or how they may or may not engage with certain experiences that we're providing. That's everything from space to programming and content as well.
For us, we've had data on occupancy. For 15 years, we've been able to tell you how many people come into a building and who's in the office, who's not. The new types of data that we want that are the hardest to get is more of the qualitative data about how are people feeling, or how productive were they in this space versus that space, or were their needs met here versus there, and the subject of privacy and personally identifiable information. PI is an acronym everyone better know and understand and think about first. I can do more for you as a customer of mine, as an employee, as an experience, if you opt in. So all of us struggle, knowingly or not, with this problem of a value exchange every day. So I'm willing to bet that right now there's 15 to 20 apps right now in my pocket that know exactly where I am, including PwC. And I made that decision to not carry a personal phone because I'm just too stubborn. I'll take one phone, not 2. I'll never do that. And if they want to read my text, they can read my text. But I can do more with more of that type of data in now really starting to tackle some of the problems that are hardest to tackle, like how do you make people feel better and know that then the money that we spend, the capital that we spend, is actually well spent.
Yeah. I will say the other thing that I think is really interesting for us as we really operate across 4 different asset classes is how do we start to use technology to sort of stitch all of that together, both from a service aspect, but also in terms of understanding how people are using asset classes differently. There's so many great partners out there now, Convene being one of them, that are servicing different parts of the real estate industry. And what's exciting is to think about how you have an opportunity to start stitching that together. It's a huge challenge because, again, you heard this morning, picking from 7,000 prop tech companies out there as to which ones are the right ones to do it is a big challenge. But for an operator like us, an owner like us, really seeing those partners and working together with those partners to solve those challenges and really start to stitch the real estate industry together in a way that has never been done before is something that's really exciting for us.
So one last question on this point, Peter. When you're evaluating a site, whether it's to stay or to locate to a new, are you requesting data, or is any data being provided at this point between you and the property owners?
More, but no, not really between myself and the property owners. I mean, I know where my people live. I know how often they come in. What's important. Some of the most important about the property itself is, what's going to happen in the access to transportation modes and things like that. Or do you have Amazon lockers? That's a really important one. Because if you have Amazon delivery lockers in your building, then that's a good piece of data that makes us very happy.
Are there questions that you guys would like to ask to one another?
Ryan, I'd like to know, just in terms of how you guys are funding your growth, how do you think about the right way to capitalize that growth, and how you're thinking about for the next 5 years?
So for us, a core tenet of our philosophy is what we call kind of smart and disciplined growth. We've been doing this for a decade already. I think when people think about us, they think it's a startup company. We've actually been doing this for a really, really long time. And one of the governors that we have, not just in how we capitalize this, but how we think about investing our capital and our landlord partners' capital. Over the last 10 years, we've generated over a 40% unlevered return on invested capital with no terminal value, a 5 times MOIC, and we've returned all of our capital to our lender partners, equity partners at the company level in less than 3 years at the unit level. So one of the things that we do really, really well is that we underwrite. Most of my team comes from a real estate private equity or REIT background. We have a very, very formal IC process. And because we've been so disciplined and thoughtful in the way that we've grown our business and the way that we've invested our capital, we are always making sure that we're never committing the company for deals and capital that we don't have the money on the balance sheet to fund. And so we just closed a big credit facility a couple weeks ago. We have enough capital between that plus existing free cash to fund our business plan all the way into 2021 at a growth rate that's somewhere between 50 to 60% a year. So I think for us, it's about don't get over your ski tips. And strategically, what we're seeing happen is that as our building owner partners are getting more comfortable with the returns, if my cost of capital is a 6 or an 8 as a landlord, and Convene, you can generate a 40 on your dollars, I'd rather be in your business sometimes than my own business. And how do we start to use the landlord's balance sheet more effectively? And so 3 to 4 years ago, landlords were putting up less than 30% of the capital to do deals with us. Now, 25% of our business is 100%, and in our pipeline moving forward, it's closer to kind of 70%. So our business is inherently becoming less capital intensive. But even with that said, we manage our cash flow and our commitments. And this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. I think this is a 20-year trend, not a 2-year trend.
Yeah.
I have a brief question for Laura. It's very simple one. You can yes or no it. Are owner-operators ready for the waterfall change if I was to all of a sudden say, you know what, I'm going to opt for a 5-year lease instead of a 15-year lease? Softball.
Yeah. So if all of our tenants said that today, the answer is no. I think that on the flip side, we absolutely are seeing trends in the market that our tenants need and want more flexibility. I think that, look, WeWork has been in the news over and over again, especially recently. I won't necessarily say anything about them, but I will say that they have changed the industry in that tenants are realizing they can ask for more, honestly, from landlords. And I think that what's happening is, again, I mentioned it earlier, it's not necessarily in the landlord's interest, but it's where the industry is going. And so how do we then take advantage and plan for that in a way? And so, as an example, we did launch our own co-working space thinking of it more as an amenity for the building, and giving our tenants more options as to how they take space in our buildings that's right for them. I think one of the challenges we're having right now relevant to this is balancing what our tenants are asking for and saying they need and what the capital markets are allowing for. I think that's going to be the gap we're going to find ourselves in for a period of time. I do think that in general the industry is moving in that direction because tenants are changing what they're asking for.
We're ready for questions from the audience. Hey, Jay.
So, Laura and Ryan, as landlords and the convenes of the world get closer together, is it too early, or can you tell us yet how it's affecting tenants? Are tenants coming into buildings and saying, I'll take less space because convene is downstairs? Does that help you lease up your buildings? I mean, that was part of your story, I think, in New York, right? I think that was a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is that the landlords that have made the commitment, and we typically only go into value-add repositioning or new development, because if you think about the value that we're creating from a strategic amenity perspective, our ability to move the Argus metrics is greatest in a transition, which is one of the reasons where if you look across our entire portfolio, there maybe was one core asset that we even went into, and it just, unit economically, it worked as a lease, and we just kind of did a market deal. What we've seen is that the landlords that have committed early and have integrated into their leasing strategy, their asset strategy, those assets have outperformed from a metrics perspective. Better velocity, relatively speaking, higher occupancy against comp set, velocity being the biggest metric that we move. Rents are tough because it's tough to get apples to apples, but against underwriting, we've gone into 2 assets in the last 12 months that were on the watch list internally, and within 90 days of us opening went from the watch list to some of the best performing assets. Park Avenue Tower in Midtown Blackstone is one of the best leased up buildings in all of Midtown Manhattan, and 151 West 42nd Street, the former 4 Times Square asset, that was in a tough spot before we ended up doing what we did with the building owner partner there. So what we've seen is if you commit, there's a premium and a return that you end up getting on your capital. But I think for a lot of the reasons Laura mentioned, how are the capital markets going to think about it? Am I going to get a cap rate discount on the back end? I'm over investing in CapEx relative to what my probably traditional business plan would be. There's a little bit of a leap of faith that has to happen. But for those that have made the jump, I think have been financially rewarded for that decision.
Yeah, and I tend to agree, and I think one of the opportunities we see in the market right now is just the massive amount of aging stock, core locations, but aged stock that, we're excited to bring a little bit of a developer's mindset to that stock and really think about it from the inside out, bringing in partners like Convene. I do think we see a big opportunity to really gain traction with tenants on those types of assets. I think in terms of the data of what, tenants in our building are doing and whether they are actually, taking less space, I think we're still at the outset of that. But certainly in talking with our tenant partners, that is where we feel the industry is going.
Okay. Questions? Go.
So I'm a land use attorney, and one of the things that I react to in this conversation is about blurred lines, is that it challenges the fundamentals of conventional zoning ordinances, which are to establish very clear lines. Can you speak to your experiences with communities and how the stakeholders have reacted to the blurring of the lines, and whether some are embracing it, adapting, and whether others are, kind of stodgier about it?
Joe, do you want to take the first shot?
Sure. The answer is yes to all of the above. And I think it takes a lot of time to work with the communities to help them understand. Their concerns when you're densifying, when you're bringing everything together, are the natural concerns of what happens around, what's the traffic, those kind of things. But I think when you work with a community and let them be a part of design, but also really understand the strength of bringing all these together, I think what we've found is it slows you down to really speed you up. So you slow down at the beginning, it's a little bit extended design period and entitlement period, but once the community buys in, you don't get as much friction as you're moving forward. As far as zoning, we're in 9 radically different markets. And I would tell you our experiences in some markets, they've gotten very sophisticated and supportive. In other markets, we're dragging them along, which is hard to believe because this is really what's best for urban communities, is to have really vibrant places all there together. But in general, I think upfront, investing the time up front with community for us has just accelerated the ability to move through.
Other questions? Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.